A series in which I am going to introduce you to literally every person who has ever been a part of the United States Congress. May 15th, 1797, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the first day of the first session of the 5th United States Congress, House of Representatives edition. Regular viewers of this series will, of course, immediately notice that May 15th is not the first Monday in December. But don't worry, there's a perfectly cromulent explanation for the early start date, which we'll get to in a few minutes. The 5th United States Congress will turn out to be one of the most historically significant Congresses of all time. This is going to be a long one. Buckle up. But before I can tell you what happens during this Congress, I have to introduce you to who's in it. So with that in mind, let's meet our opening day lineup of representatives. New Hampshire is an at-large state. They've got 4 seats, and 2 of their representatives are here on time: Abiel Foster and Jonathan Freeman. Foster is an original representative, although he hasn't been here the whole time. He served in the first Congress, then lost his bid for re-election in 1790, then lost again in 1792. He also lost in 1794, but since New Hampshire election law required winning candidates to get a majority, he and Payne Wingate went to a runoff, which Foster won handily. So he's been back since the beginning of the last Congress. Coming into this Congress, he actually won on the first ballot. Jonathan Freeman is a brand new guy. He is a 52-year-old planter originally from Mansfield, Connecticut. Freeman served in both houses of the New Hampshire state legislature, and he is currently treasurer of Dartmouth College, a job he started back in 1789. He is an uncle of Massachusetts Representative Nathaniel Freeman Jr. In the election for this Congress, Freeman did the same thing Abiel Foster did 2 years ago. He just missed the cut on the first ballot, but then won the runoff handily. Massachusetts is a district state, and they've got 14 seats, and 11 of their representatives are here on time. Theophilus Bradbury, Dwight Foster, Nathaniel Freeman Jr., Samuel Lyman, Harrison Gray Otis, John Reed, Samuel Sewell, William Shepard, George Thatcher, Joseph Bradley Varnum, and Peleg Wadsworth. A quick note regarding their parties. Freeman had been a Federalist in the last Congress, but switched to the Democratic-Republican side before being elected to this one. Of these 11 guys, 9 of them are incumbents. Samuel Sewell is the newest of them, having just joined us during the last Congress. He was specially elected to replace Benjamin Goodhue after Goodhue moved up to the Senate. As for the rest, Samuel Lyman, Nathaniel Freeman Jr., John Reed, Joseph Bradley Varnum, and Theophilus Bradbury all joined us at the start of the last Congress. Peleg Wadsworth and Dwight Foster, brother of Rhode Island Senator Theodore Foster, aka Old Crazy Eyes, joined at the start of the third Congress in 1793, and George Thatcher is one of the few remaining original representatives that have been here since the very beginning. In fact, if you're a regular viewer of this series, then you'll recall that George Thatcher is the punctuality Iron Man. He has been on time to every single session of Congress since the very beginning, and he continues that streak here. And so that means that Massachusetts has 2 brand new guys, William Shepard and Harrison Gray Otis. William Shepard is a 59-year-old planter and career military guy from Westfield. He fought in the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War, during which he spent the infamous winter at Valley Forge. But what I really need to tell you about is Shays' Rebellion. The story of Shays' Rebellion is long and complicated, but the short, oversimplified version goes something like this. The government under the Articles of Confederation was essentially broke, all the time. It needed money, and it needed that money in specie, meaning hard money, meaning not paper money. Don't ask me to get into the history of currency in America. It's extremely complicated, and there's no way to make it interesting. Under the Articles of Confederation, the government couldn't directly tax the citizens, so it needed the states to levy taxes on the people to raise the money that the government needed. But specie was very rare, especially in Western farm country. In Western Massachusetts, angry farmers banded together and petitioned the state legislature for debt relief, saying they could not pay the additional taxes in hard money because there was simply no hard money to be had. for anyone. After the legislature thoroughly ignored them, groups of angry farmers, led in part by a man called Daniel Shays, began marching on their local courts, shutting them down and preventing them from issuing orders to evict farmers from their lands over non-payment of taxes. With me so far? Okay, here's where William Shepherd comes in. Shepherd commanded a group of local militia that successfully stopped the rebels from shutting down the courts, so the Shays men changed their plans. They organized themselves into something less like a group of protesters and more like an actual militia, dividing into companies and everything. And instead of aiming to shut down courts, they decided to try and take over the Springfield Armory. Unfortunately for them, one of their communications was intercepted, and so when 2 of their 3 companies arrived in Springfield on January 25, 1787, they were met by General William Shepherd and his army, a force of roughly 1,200 men. Shepherd ordered his troops to fire a warning shot over the heads of the Shays men. When that failed to disperse them, Shepherd ordered his men to fire 2 cannons filled with grape shot. That was not a warning shot, and it did not fail. 4 of the Shays men were killed, 20 were injured, and the rebels scattered after that. For his part, apparently, Shepherd really didn't want to fire on the crowd, but the fact is that he did. And for a long time afterward, his reputation was not great. According to this line from his Wikipedia page, huge citation needed right here, his neighbors were so mad at him that he was called the murderer of brethren and they gouged out his horse's eyes. Jesus. But anyway, that was 10 years ago. Here in 1797, his reputation has improved to the point that, although he didn't get a majority on the first ballot, he was elected on the second. The other new guy is Harrison Gray Otis from the 8th District, aka the 1st Middle, aka the one that includes Boston. Otis is a 31-year-old lawyer from a prominent family. His father is Samuel Otis, who has been the Secretary of the Senate since 1789, and Harrison's aunt is Mercy Otis Warren, one of the first successful female writers in America. His uncle was a man called James Otis, who once wrote that he wanted to die by being struck by lightning, and then in 1783 died when he was struck by lightning. As for Harrison himself, he'll go on to have a long and distinguished political career, but here in 1797, his resume just includes 1 term as a state representative and a brief stint as U.S. Attorney for the Massachusetts District. Rhode Island is an at-large state. They've got 2 seats, and both of their representatives are here on time. Elisha Reynolds Potter first joined us during the last Congress. He was specially elected to replace Benjamin Bourne, who had actually already won the election to this Congress, but then resigned to accept a judicial post. As for Rhode Island's other representative, Christopher Grant Champlin is a 29-year-old brand new guy from Newport. He's also a piece of shit. Worse than Pierce Butler, even. By the way, Juno, I'm going to need a new flag for this guy. Anyway, Champlin is a merchant, in quotations here for good reason. Mainly, he's really just a super rich fail son who doesn't really do anything. You know, sort of like this guy. After graduating from Harvard and then studying in France, Champlin moved to New York City and lost a shitload of his dad's money in the stock market. But don't feel bad for his dad. Most of that money came from slave trading. So anyway, after losing all his money, young Champlin went crawling back to Newport, and his dad and uncle gave him a job with their shipping company. Would you like to guess what sort of cargo they shipped?
My great-great-great-grandfather started this company with 1 single rickety, leaky, handcrafted slave ship and a simple motto: people selling people to people.
Yeah. The merchandise that his family's company sells is people. Shockingly, Champlin's entry on the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress neglects to mention any of that. But on this channel, slave trading is frowned upon, to say the very least, and so, say it with me now, fuck Christopher Champlin. Connecticut is an at-large state. They've got 7 seats, and 6 of their representatives are here on time. Joshua Coit, Samuel Dana, James Davenport, Chauncey Goodrich, Roger Griswold, and Nathaniel Smith. All 6 of these guys are incumbents. Samuel Dana and James Davenport were both specially elected during the last Congress to replace Uriah Tracy and James Hillhouse, respectively, after those guys moved up to the Senate. Roger Griswold, Chauncey Goodrich, and Nathaniel Smith joined us at the start of the last Congress, and Joshua Coit joined us at the start of the 3rd Congress. Quick fun fact, James Davenport, Chauncey Goodrich, and Nathaniel Smith all have brothers who will be joining this series in the future. But while John Davenport and Elizur Goodrich will be in the next episode, Nathan Smith, yes, Nathaniel's brother is named Nathan, won't be joining us until the 23rd Congress in 1833. At the rate I get these videos done, I should be about 98 years old at that point. Also, if the name Roger Griswold sounds familiar to you, it's because I already did an entire video about him and a Vermont representative called Matthew Lyon. In fact, that incident happens during this Congress. And hey, speaking of Matthew Lyon, Vermont is a district state. They've got 2 seats, and one of their representatives is here, Matthew Lyon. Now, officially, Lyon is a brand new guy, but he doesn't really feel brand new because I've already done that whole video about him. If you've seen that video, then you already know him. But for those of you who haven't, Matthew Lyon is a 47-year-old newspaper editor from Fairhaven. He was originally from Ireland and came to the colonies as an indentured servant when he was a teenager. He's been a member of the Vermont state legislature since 1787, and he's been trying to get into this Congress for some time now. In 1791, he actually won on the first ballot before losing to Israel Smith on the second. In 1793, he lost to Israel Smith on both ballots. In 1795, he again won on the first ballot, but lost on the second, again to Israel Smith, this time by less than 1 percentage point. He actually challenged that one, but still lost. This time around, it took him 3 ballots to get the required majority, but he actually finally did it. Take that, Israel Smith! Anyway, Matthew Lyon is one hell of a character, and we will hear from him again several more times in this episode. By the way, Vermont's other seat is currently vacant. Daniel Buck had been re-elected, but he declined his seat, and the special election to replace him hasn't happened yet. New York is a district state. They've got 10 seats, and get this, all 10 representatives are here on time.
Hooray!
They are David Brooks, James Cochran, Lucas Elmendorf, Henry Glenn, Jonathan Havens, Hezekiah Hosmer, Edward Livingston, John Van Allen, Philip Van Cortlandt, and John Williams. Havens, Livingston, and Williams joined us at the start of the last Congress in 1795. Quick fun fact, Livingston is from the 2nd District, aka New York City. It's one of only 2 cities in the entire country populous enough to be its own congressional district, the other one being Philadelphia. Philip Van Cortlandt, Henry Glenn, and John Van Allen joined us at the start of the 3rd Congress in 1793. Another quick fun fact, Van Allen is from the 8th District, which is the only congressional district in the entire country to be made up of 2 completely separate counties. And I don't mean separate like the 3rd District, where one part of it is an island. No, this is just Clinton and Rensselaer counties, completely separate from each other, yet somehow combined into one district. And that means New York has 4 brand new guys. Lucas C. Elmendorf is a 48 or 49-year-old lawyer from Kingston, and according to the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress, he ran unsuccessfully for this seat back in 1794. However, that is incorrect. That person was Conrad E. Elmendorf, who is also, coincidentally, the guy that Lucas C. Elmendorf defeated for this seat this time. I will give the bio guide a pass here, though. There were several Elmendorfs active in New York at this time. Besides Lucas C., there was also a Conrad E. and a Conrad I. Plus, the C in Lucas C. Elmendorf stands for, you guessed it, Conrad. David Brooks is a 40 or 41-year-old lawyer originally from Philadelphia. He moved to New York City around 1783. During the Revolutionary War, he was captured at Fort Washington and spent 3 years as a prisoner of war before finally being paroled in 1780. He served 1 term in the state assembly, then moved to Dutchess County and served a couple more terms in the state assembly. Coming into this Congress, Brooks defeated incumbent Theodorus Bailey. Hezekiah L. Hosmer is a 31-year-old lawyer from Hudson. He is a son of Titus Hosmer, who was a Continental Congressman and a signer of the Articles of Confederation, and the L stood for Lord. Hezekiah Lord Hosmer. That may be the best name in the entire 5th Congress. This was an open election since Ezekiel Gilbert retired, and Hosmer defeated a future congressman called John Van Ness. And finally, from the gigantic 10th District, aka most of the state of New York, we've got James Cochran, a 28-year-old lawyer and Army major originally from Albany. He is a nephew of former Senator Philip Schuyler, and he defeated the incumbent William Cooper by just 18 votes. By the way, shout out to Charles Williamson here, playing the Ralph Nader role 200 years early. Anyway, 18 votes is super close, but it actually wasn't the closest election for this Congress. It wasn't even the closest one in New York. Philip Van Cortlandt won his election by just 13 votes. New Jersey is an at-large state. They've got 5 seats, and 3 of their representatives are here on time. Jonathan Dayton has been with us for a while now. He joined at the beginning of the Second Congress back in 1791. He was also Speaker of the House in the last Congress. Mark Thompson joined us at the beginning of the last Congress in 1795, and if you're wondering, yes, I still hate that spelling of Thompson. You might think, well, it's been so long since I've done one of these episodes, maybe I've calmed down since then. But no, there is only one correct way to spell Thompson, and that is a hill I will die on. And lastly, James Henderson Imlay is a brand new guy. He is a 32-year-old lawyer and state assemblyman from Imlaystown, and yes, that's what the town was already called before he was born. It was named after one of his ancestors. Also, James Imlay isn't the town's only success story. Chris Thompson, drummer for the band Vampire Weekend, is also from Imlaystown. Wait a second. Thompson? Son of a bitch! Pennsylvania has 13 seats, and if you've seen the previous episodes of this series, then you know that they've had some trouble deciding on how best to elect their representatives. They started at large, then they were districts, then they went back to at large, then went back to districts. Coming into this Congress, for the first time, they didn't change it. They still have 12 districts, the fourth one being a plural district, meaning a big enough population to have 2 representatives, and so ultimately, Pennsylvania has 13 seats and 11 of their representatives are here on time. They are David Bard, John Chapman, George Eag, Albert Gallatin, John Hanna, Thomas Hartley, John Wilkes Katera, Blair McClenachan, Samuel Sitgreaves, John Swanwick, and Richard Thomas. Gallatin, Swanwick, Thomas, Sitgreaves, and Bard joined at the start of the last Congress in 1795, and George Eag joined during the last Congress after being specially elected to replace Daniel Heaster in 1796. Gallatin, by the way, is a former senator, which is unusual. Most congressmen who served in both the House and Senate start in the House and later move up to the Senate. But Gallatin was disqualified from the Senate back in 1794. It's a long story, just go watch episode 3A. And so he immediately ran for the House and won easily. John Wilkes Katera joined us all the way back at the start of the Second Congress in 1791, and Thomas Hartley is our second original representative. So Hartley joins George Thatcher of Massachusetts. New Hampshire's Abiel Foster was also an original representative, but he hasn't been here continuously since then, so he doesn't get to be in the club. So anyway, that means Pennsylvania has 3 brand new guys. Blair McClenachan is a 61 or 62 or 63-year-old merchant originally from Ireland. His family moved to Philadelphia when he was a kid. By the time the Revolutionary War started, McClenachan had become one of the wealthiest men in the colonies. Alongside fellow Pennsylvanian Robert Morris, McClenachan was one of the bigger financiers of the war effort, and he even provided his own ships to be used for battle. In 1788, after Morris was selected to be one of Pennsylvania's first senators, McClenachan tried to follow his friend into government by running for the new House of Representatives, but he was unsuccessful. He settled for Pennsylvania's state House of Representatives instead and served there from 1790 to 1795. John Chapman is a 56-year-old state representative from Upper Makefield Township. He was Justice of the Peace and a judge on the Bucks County Court of Common Pleas, and that's pretty much all we know about his background. He joined the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 1787 and served there until his election to this Congress. And lastly, John Andre Hanna is a 34 or 35-year-old lawyer from Harrisburg. He was originally from Flemington, New Jersey, and moved to Pennsylvania to set up a law practice in 1783. He did 1 term in the State House of Representatives in 1791, then decided to embark on a military career instead. A few years later, he said, that's not for me, and went back to politics. He ran for Congress in 1794, but lost a close election to Samuel Maclay. This time around, though, he got his revenge in a big way, defeating Maclay by a margin so big that I have to assume Maclay wasn't actually running. Maryland is a district state. They've got 8 seats, and 7 of their representatives are here on time. William Craik and Richard Sprigg Jr. both joined us during the last Congress after being specially elected to replace Jeremiah Crabb and Gabriel Duvall, respectively. This time around, Sprigg was re-elected unopposed, while Craik defeated former Representative Benjamin Edwards by a mere 25 votes. George Dent and William Hindman joined us back in 1793. Dent joined at the start of the 3rd Congress, and Hindman joined during the 2nd Congress after being specially elected to replace Joshua Saney. And so, Maryland has 3 brand new guys. George Bear Jr. is a 33-year-old merchant from Frederick. He served 1 term in the state legislature, and that's all I got. I have no idea what else he did, but he must have been pretty popular. He defeated future Congressman Samuel Ringgold by 45 percentage points. William Matthews is a 42-year-old lawyer from Cecil County. He was a county court judge and a state rep back in the 1780s. In 1792, he ran for this seat unsuccessfully. Shout out to poor John Lee Webster here. But this time around, he managed to defeat incumbent Gabriel Christie by 80 votes. And lastly, John Dennis is a 25-year-old lawyer and the youngest member of the 5th Congress. For now. Dennis was from a place in Maryland called Pocomoke City, which is fun to say. Also, according to its Wikipedia page, Pocomoke City's nickname is the friendliest town on the eastern shore, despite the fact that it's not on the shore and there's a section tab for notable murders. Virginia is a district state. They've got 19 seats, the largest delegation, and 16 of their representatives are here on time. 8 of them are brand new guys, and the 8 incumbents started in each of the previous 4 Congresses. There's John Clopton and Samuel J. Cabell, who joined us at the start of the last Congress in 1795. Then we've got Thomas Claiborne, Carter Bassett Harrison, Anthony New, and John Nicholas, who all joined at the start of the 3rd Congress in 1793. Abraham B. Venable joined at the start of the 2nd Congress back in 1791, and William B. Giles has been here since the 1st Congress. He's not an original representative, though. He joined for the 3rd session of the 1st Congress after being specially elected to replace the deceased Theodoric Bland. So that leaves the 8 brand new guys. Daniel Morgan is a 60 or 61-year-old career military guy originally from New Jersey, where he was nothing more than a backwoods illiterate teamster, in this era meaning wagon driver. He worked with the army as a civilian during the French and Indian War, and after a fight with a British officer, Morgan received a punishment of 500 lashes. Jesus Christ. But on the plus side, his wagon business was successful, and he made plenty of money. Unfortunately, he also spent all that money on drinking and gambling. Morgan moved to Winchester, Virginia, and his life turned around when the Revolutionary War came along. He formed a company of riflemen, basically a 1700s version of snipers, and became Captain Morgan. When the invasion of Canada was authorized in 1775, Benedict Arnold chose Morgan to lead one of the 3 divisions. In December, they reached and attacked Quebec. It did not go well. Arnold was injured, General Richard Montgomery was killed, and Captain Morgan was captured. He spent a year in captivity, got released in a prisoner exchange, and immediately rejoined the Continental Army. He met up with General Horatio Gates and was a big part of the American victory at Saratoga. So much so that John Trumbull gave him prominent placement in his painting, The Surrender of General Burgoyne. A couple unrelated but interesting notes about this painting. This guy is Philip Schuyler, who went on to become a senator. And this guy is Joseph Silly, who was one of the losing candidates in New Hampshire's election for this Congress, and he's also the grandfather of future Congressman and duel victim Jonathan Silly. Anyway, in 1781, Captain Morgan defeated the seemingly invincible Bannister Tarleton at the Battle of Cowpens and then resigned his commission later in the year. He retired to private life and stayed there until the Whiskey Rebellion happened. He put on his old uniform and led a division of troops into western Pennsylvania. When that was over, Morgan returned to Virginia and ran for Congress in 1795, but lost to Robert Rutherford. This time around, Morgan won the rematch. Barely. David Holmes is a 28-year-old lawyer, originally from Hanover, Pennsylvania. His family moved to Frederick County, Virginia when he was a kid. Holmes has a long political career ahead of him, but for now, this is his first foray into politics. James Macker is something of a mystery. According to the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress, he was born in Virginia, and his birth date is unknown. However, according to the political graveyard, Macker was born in Scotland in 1764. His entry on Find a Grave supports that, complete with a more detailed biography, so that's what we're going with. And my never-ending feud with the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress continues. Abram Trigg is a 46 or 47-year-old lawyer from Montgomery County. He fought in the war and later served as a delegate to Virginia's Constitutional Convention in 1788, where he voted against ratification. Fun fact, he named his estate Buchanan's Bottom, which I can't help but giggle at because all I think of when I hear Buchanan is this guy. Matthew Clay is a 43-year-old farmer and lawyer from Halifax County. He fought in the war and, more recently, did 4 years in the Virginia State Legislature. And, like most Virginians named Clay, he was related to future Senator Henry Clay. Matthew's uncle is Henry's grandfather. So, if I understand how cousin terminology works, and it's extremely possible that I don't, that makes them first cousins once removed. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Thomas Evans is a 41 or 42-year-old state representative from Accomack County. He graduated from the College of William and Mary, then served 2 terms in the Virginia House of Delegates. After that, he fell off the radar for 13 years and re-emerged in 1794 when he was again elected to the state legislature. He did 3 more terms there before winning election to this Congress by defeating incumbent John Page, who had been one of the few remaining original representatives. John Dawson is a 34 or 35-year-old lawyer from Spotsylvania County, and he's got some big shoes to fill. Big shoes to fill. Big shoes to fill. You see, this seat had been held by another original representative, a guy you might have heard of called James Madison. But if anyone has the resume to follow Little Jemmy, it's John Dawson. He served 3 years in the Virginia House of Delegates, he did 1 term in the Continental Congress, he was a delegate to the State Constitutional Convention in 1788, and he was a member of Virginia's Privy Council, which was essentially like the governor's cabinet. And finally, Walter Jones is a 51-year-old physician from Williamsburg. He first graduated from the College of William and Mary in 1760 when he was just 15 years old, and he got his medical degree in Edinburgh in 1770. From 1785 to 87, he served in the state senate, and in 1788, like Dawson and Trigg, Jones was a delegate to the state constitutional convention. Unlike Dawson and Trigg, though, Jones voted for ratification. In the election to this Congress, he defeated a man with the wonderful name of Burgess Ball. North Carolina is a district state. They've got 10 seats, and 8 of their representatives are here on time. They are Thomas Blunt, Nathan Bryan, James Gillespie, William Barry Grove, Matthew Locke, Nathaniel Macon, Richard Stanford, and Robert Williams. Nathan Bryan joined at the start of the last Congress in 1795. Matthew Locke, James Gillespie, and Thomas Blunt joined at the beginning of the 3rd Congress in 1793. Thomas Blunt is a brother of Tennessee Senator William Blunt, which will become a plot point later in this episode. And Matthew Locke is 66 or 67 years old, making him the oldest member of the House for this Congress. The other 2 incumbents are Nathaniel Macon and William Barry Grove, who both joined at the start of the 2nd Congress back in 1791. So North Carolina has 2 brand new guys. Richard Stanford is a 30-year-old teacher originally from Vienna, Maryland. He moved to North Carolina in 1789 to set up a school. Fun fact, Stanford's wife Jeanette is the daughter of Alexander Mebane, who you may remember from episode 3 of this series. Mebane was North Carolina's representative from this same district from 1793 until his death in office in 1795. Coming into this Congress in the regular election in September of 1796, Stanford defeated incumbent Absalom Tatum, who then immediately resigned instead of finishing his term. This was a fairly common occurrence back then. But, in a strange twist, when North Carolina held a special election in November of 1796 to finish Tatum's term, Stanford was defeated by a significant margin by William F. Strudwick. So Strudwick served for a few months, and now Stanford is taking over. That is a less common occurrence. Generally, when someone wins an election and then the incumbent dies or resigns, the person who is now a representative-elect is the one specially elected to finish the current term. The other new guy is Robert Williams, and figuring out just who the hell he is was quite the adventure. But I think I got it, so here we go. Robert Williams is a lawyer from Surrey County. So far, so good. The confusion surrounding Williams is his age. He might be as young as 23, which would make him the youngest congressman ever, and on a more personal note, it would completely undermine my William Claiborne video from last year, but Robert Williams also might be as old as 30. The issue causing the confusion here is that there are two Robert Williamses, and they are cousins, which means they have a lot of overlapping biographical details. The key to unraveling this mystery turned out to be a man with the awesome name of Marmaduke Williams. From the political graveyard. Robert Overton Williams was born in North Carolina in 1773 and somehow got into the state Senate in 1792 at the age of 19 and into the United States Congress in 1797 at the age of 23 or 24. He eventually died in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1821. This one is a cousin of Marmaduke and Robert Williams and a brother of John, Lewis, and Thomas Williams. The other Robert Williams was born in North Carolina in 1766 and eventually moved to the Mississippi Territory where he became governor in 1805 and died in Monroe, Louisiana in 1836. This one is a brother of Marmaduke and a cousin of John, Thomas, Lewis, and Robert Overton Williams. Now, the Wikipedia page seems to have combined the two, saying he was born in 1773, became a congressman in 1797, moved to the Mississippi Territory to be governor for 4 years, then moved back to North Carolina to be adjutant general for 9 years, but his wife apparently stayed in Mississippi and died there in 1814, and so he moved to Monroe, Louisiana, where he operated a plantation until he died in 1836. It's all over the place, and I have trouble believing it. The Biographical Directory of the United States Congress says that the congressional Robert Williams is the older Robert Williams, the brother of Marmaduke and the one that later moved to Mississippi and eventually died in Louisiana. But as I mentioned a bit ago, I do have an ongoing feud with the Biographical Directory, so we're gonna need a second source. For this, we turn to the North Carolina Encyclopedia Online, which I've found to be pretty reliable. This also says the congressional Robert Williams is the older one, and even further cements the relative connection by pointing out that he's the son of Nathaniel and Mary Ann. So I feel 100% confident in saying that the political graveyard simply has the Congressional Service credited to the wrong Robert Williams. Which means that Williams is not the youngest congressman ever. Which further means that my William C.C. Claiborne video is still accurate. But how old is Robert Williams? The Wikipedia date is out because it's from the other guy, but even the sources I use to decipher which Robert Williams is the congressional one don't agree on a birth date. Political Graveyard, 1766. Biographical Directory, 1768. NCpedia, 1770. Find a Grave backs up the 1766 date, but the description for him is the same smash up as the Wikipedia article, so I don't know how much I trust it. Ultimately, as much as I hate to say this, it kinda really doesn't matter how old he is. We know he's not the youngest congressman ever, we know he's not the youngest congressman in this Congress, so it is what it is. For our purposes, all that matters right here and now is that we have a brand new guy called Robert Williams. He's a lawyer from Surrey County, he has a brother named Marmaduke, and he is somewhere between 26 and 31 years old. By the way, Marmaduke Williams is a future congressman, so we will see him again. South Carolina is a district state. They've got 6 seats and only 3 of their representatives are here on time. Robert Goodloe Harper, John Rutledge Jr., and William Smith. Harper is the only incumbent, and he's been here since 1795. He joined during the 3rd Congress after being specially elected to replace the deceased Alexander Gillen. So that means Rutledge and Smith are brand new guys. John Rutledge Jr. is a 30 or 31-year-old lawyer from Charleston. He is a son of founding father John Rutledge, and coming into this Congress, he defeated a man with the unlikely name of L. Nathan Haskell. It was an open election because the guy who had been in this seat, Wade Hampton, chose not to run for another term, probably because he got tired of people making fun of his hat. Speaking of portraits, if you're wondering why I haven't showed you John Rutledge Jr. yet, it's because it deserves a proper reveal. I once said that James Sherman of New Jersey had the best congressional portrait, and certainly Wade Hampton is up there too, but I think we might have a new leader in the clubhouse. Ladies and gentlemen, John Rutledge Jr. The other new guy is William Smith, a 45-year-old plantation owner originally from Pennsylvania. He moved to South Carolina as a teenager, then fought in the Revolutionary War. He became a county judge in 1785 and a state senator in 1790 and held both jobs up until his election to this Congress. One of the guys he defeated in this election had the awesome name of William Will. Georgia is an at-large state, they've got 2 seats, and both of their representatives are here on time. Abraham Baldwin and John Millage are both incumbents. Millage first joined us back in the 2nd Congress when he was specially elected to fill the vacancy caused by the disqualification of Anthony Wayne. He lost the election to the 3rd Congress, but then rejoined us at the beginning of the last one. Baldwin is our 3rd original representative, joining the club with Thomas Hartley of Pennsylvania and George Thatcher of Massachusetts. Coming into this Congress, both men were re-elected easily, defeating former Congressmen Thomas Carnes and Francis Willis. There were also 295 votes for someone called George Naylor. Naylor? I hardly know her.
Boo!
Okay, so May 15th, 1797. Our opening day lineup is complete. We've got 16 states, 106 seats. Oh, right, we're still missing 3 states. In the case of Delaware, they only have 1 representative, and that guy just isn't here yet. And for the other 2, Kentucky and Tennessee haven't elected their representatives yet. Which sounds weird, but most of the time it's not a big deal. You see, technically the congressional term does start March 4th, but usually the first meeting of Congress isn't until December. So it's not uncommon for states to hold their congressional elections during the intervening months. In fact, Kentucky has held their elections late like this ever since they became a state in 1792. This is just the first time that the House was called into session early, and so for now, Kentucky's 2 seats are vacant. As for Tennessee, they just became a state last year, and they elected Andrew Jackson right away to join the 4th Congress. But so far as I can tell, they never held an election for this Congress, which is strange. Now, it is possible that they did hold 2 elections at the same time, and that the records for the election to this Congress are simply lost, but, spoiler alert, nobody's going to show up for this seat during this session, and Tennessee's going to hold a special election during the recess in September. Okay, so 16 states, 106 seats. 4 of them are vacant, which means we're expecting 102 representatives, and we've got 82 of them here on time, which is the best first day attendance the House has seen up to this point. And that's about it for the good news. You see, with the new party system in full swing, the 5th Congress House of Representatives can best be described in one word: acrimonious. So let's dive in. May 15th, 1797, day 1. Our 82 representatives are sworn in, and Jonathan Dayton of New Jersey is elected Speaker of the House for the 2nd straight term. May 16th, 1797, 4 more representatives arrive and take their seats: James Sherman and Thomas Sinnickson of New Jersey, John Trigg of Virginia, and Thomas Sumter of South Carolina. Sherman, Sinnickson, and Sumter are all former representatives, and coincidentally, all of them first joined back at the start of the 1st Congress. So they can join Abiel Foster of New Hampshire in the original representatives that don't really count as original representatives club. Sherman and Sinnickson left after the 1st Congress, while Sumter left after the 2nd. Trigg, on the other hand, is a brand new guy. John J. Trigg is a 48 or 49-year-old lawyer from Bedford County, and he is the older brother of Abram Trigg, another Virginia brand new guy that we met a few minutes ago. Both Triggs fought in the war and later attended the state ratification convention, where they both voted against it. But my favorite thing about him is this: the middle initial J stood for Johns. Johns Trigg. Move over, Hezekiah Lord Hosmer, I've got a new favorite name. Well, actually, it's probably a tie with former New York Representative Cornelius and Schoonmaker. Also on May 16th, the House and Senate come together to endure a long-ass speech from President Adams. I talked about this in the Senate half of this episode, but I was wrong about one thing. I said that Adams sent Congress a super long letter. Pity the poor clerk who had to read the whole thing. But as it turns out, according to the Journal of the House, Adams actually delivered this super long speech in person. So instead, pity the poor representatives and senators who had to endure the whole thing. I mean, we don't know what John Adams' voice sounded like, but look at him. There's no way that this man was easy to listen to for that long. Anyway, to make a long-ass speech short, Adams says France is being problematic and America should have a navy, and he needs Congress to address both of those things, hence the early start date. So they'll have this short session, and then the second session will start in November like normal. May 17th, 3 more representatives arrive: William Gordon and Jeremiah Smith of New Hampshire, and Andrew Gregg of Pennsylvania. Smith and Gregg are both incumbents who have been here since the beginning of the Second Congress back in 1791, but William Gordon is a brand new guy. He is a 34-year-old lawyer from Amherst. He's originally from Boston, but he moved to New Hampshire to set up his law practice after graduating from Harvard. He also served in the state Senate for a couple years. Also on this day, a committee is appointed to prepare an answer to President Adams's long-ass speech. It was tradition at this time for Congress to formally respond to presidential addresses. Quick fun fact, back during George Washington's first term, when he was still pretty good friends with James Madison, he often asked Madison to write his addresses to Congress. Meanwhile, Madison was a leading member of that Congress and was often tasked with writing the response to the president's addresses. Meaning that for a while there, most of the communication between Congress and the president was just James Madison writing back and forth to himself. May 19th, Richard Brent of Virginia arrives. He's another returning incumbent who first joined us at the start of the last Congress. May 22nd, a brand new guy arrives. James Ashton Bayard of Delaware is a 29-year-old lawyer from Wilmington, and this is his first elected office. He's originally from Philadelphia, and he moved to Delaware to study law after graduating from Princeton in 1784. If you'd like to learn more about him and his many congressional descendants, check out episode 1 of Timeline, a series that I promise I will actually continue one of these days. Also on May 22nd, the Committee to Draft an Answer to President Adams presents their work. Now, to understand what happens next, it's important to remember one thing. Even before the political parties officially started, there were still factions. And the anti-federalist or anti-administration faction always had a problem with this whole response to the president thing. They felt that it was too much like a monarchy, but they generally held their tongues because it was unpopular to criticize George Washington, at least during his first term. With the rise of the Democratic-Republican faction during Washington's second term, they became a little more outspoken. But now Washington was gone, and John Adams was, to put it mildly, an easy target for accusations of monarchical tendencies. And so, May 22nd all the way to June 2nd, the House of Representatives spends 13 days and 167 pages of the debates of Congress arguing over the wording of the answer to the president's address. At several points, there are minor personal squabbles and even a spot where a vote was counted wrong because the spectators were too loud and too close to the representatives. But of course, while all that was going on, more representatives are still arriving and taking their seats. May 23rd, Josiah Parker of Virginia and Joseph McDowell of North Carolina arrive. Josiah Parker is another original representative, bringing that club up to 4 members. Joseph McDowell is a name we've seen before, but he's a brand new guy. I think. Back in the 3rd Congress, we had Joseph McDowell, but that was a different guy. Maybe. This is another case of 2 cousins with the same name, much like the Robert Williamses from earlier. So there are 2 Joseph McDowells, but unlike the Robert Williamses, these guys have nicknames. They're named after their plantations, which does help a little with keeping them straight. We've got Pleasant Gardens Joe and Quaker Meadows Joe. But unlike the Robert Williamses, the 2 Joseph McDowells have almost the exact same life stories. They are roughly the same age, they both live near Morganton, North Carolina, both men fought in the war, both became lawyers, both served as delegates to both of North Carolina's constitutional conventions, and both men served in the North Carolina state legislature. So, as you might imagine, there is, to this day, plenty of confusion about which one is which, including which one served in Congress. According to the biographical directory, Pleasant Gardens Joe was the one in the 3rd Congress. He declined to seek another term, so Quaker Meadows Joe ran for the seat instead. He lost in 1794, but won this time around, and so he is the one here in the 5th Congress. Political Graveyard, Wikipedia, Find a Grave, and even govtrack.us all agree with the biographical directory. So I would call it an open and shut case, except the North Carolina Encyclopedia Online disagrees. And remember, I've found that one to be really dependable. According to their articles, Quaker Meadows Joe was actually the one in both the 3rd and 5th Congress. Both articles are heavily sourced, and the guy who wrote them, John Insko, is a real, actual historian. Honestly, I don't know what to think. I'm not a historian. I'm an amateur and a fraud. But one thing we do know for sure is that Pleasant Gardens Joe died in 1795. So the Joseph McDowell that is here in the 5th Congress is, for sure, Quaker Meadows Joe. The question is which one of them was our guy back in the 3rd Congress. I'm inclined to believe it was Pleasant Gardens Joe, not just because that's what I said in the video and I don't want my video to be wrong, but also because most of the sources say that's the one. So that's what I'm going to stick with. Just keep in mind that we don't know 100% for sure, and at least one expert disagrees. May 24th, 4 more representatives arrive. Samuel Smith of Maryland, William L. Smith of South Carolina, John Allen of Connecticut, and William Findley of Pennsylvania. 3 of these guys are incumbents. Samuel Smith has been here since the beginning of the 3rd Congress, William Findley has been here since the beginning of the 2nd Congress, and William Loughton Smith has been here since the beginning of the 1st Congress, making him the 5th and final original representative. By the way, this means that South Carolina now has 2 representatives in this Congress named William Smith. They don't get cool nicknames like Quaker Meadows and Pleasant Gardens, but they are differentiated in the congressional records by where they come from. This William Smith will be of Pinckney District, this William Smith will be of Charleston District, and this William Smith will be of Bel Air District in about 200 years. John Allen of Connecticut is a brand new guy. He's a 33-year-old state rep from Litchfield who actually missed the cut back in the original general election. He wasn't even close. But here's the thing about that general election. Connecticut has developed something of a pattern at this point. They elect a bunch of reps, and then at least one of them dies or resigns or for some reason declines his seat. And so they have to hold special elections to get new reps. In this case, it was 2 of them. Uriah Tracy became a senator a month after this election, and Zephaniah Swift just declined his seat. There are no existing special election records for either seat, but they definitely held them at some point, and that's how both John Allen and James Davenport, who we met earlier, were elected to this Congress. At any rate, Allen was originally from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, then moved to Germantown, Pennsylvania to be a teacher. He followed that career to New Milford, Connecticut, before finally deciding to become a lawyer, ultimately setting up his practice in Litchfield. According to his Wikipedia page, he joined the Connecticut Supreme Court in 1774, when he was just 11 years old. How precocious. May 27th, 2 more guys arrive. Thompson J. Skinner of Massachusetts and Thomas T. Davis of Kentucky. Wait, Kentucky? I thought their seats were vacant. Yeah, so according to the Wikipedia page for the 96-97 House of Representatives elections, Kentucky held theirs late in September of 1797. But, as it turns out, it was actually September of 1796. Tisk, tisk, Wikipedia. Thomas Terry Davis is a brand new guy. He's a lawyer and state representative from Flavanna County whose entire early life is something of a mystery. All we know is that at some point he moved west and became a lawyer in 1789 in the part of Virginia that would become Kentucky a few years later. And that's it. We don't even know his date of birth. The biographical directory has no idea, while the political graveyard and Find a Grave both just say 1765. The Wikipedia page has a unique take. It helpfully says before 1789. It's good to know that Davis was at least 8 years old when this Congress started. As for Thompson J. Skinner, he is an incumbent who first joined us back in January, near the end of the 4th Congress. He was specially elected to replace Theodore Sedgwick, who had resigned to move up to the Senate. Fun fact, the 5th Congress now has this stupid-ass spelling of Thompson as a first, middle, and last name. May 30th, the other Kentucky representative arrives, and it's another brand new guy. John Fowler is a plantation owner from Woodford County, and like so many guys already in this episode, his age is something of a mystery. The Bio Guide and the Political Graveyard both say he was born in 1755, but both the Kentucky Encyclopedia and his actual tombstone say April 27th, 1756. And I like specifics, so that's the one we're going with. Fowler previously ran for the Senate in 1794, but finished third behind Humphrey Marshall and John Breckinridge. June 3rd, 1797. For the last 13 days, the House has been squabbling over the wording of their address to President Adams. But in the midst of that, Vermont Representative Matthew Lyon has been complaining specifically about the need to physically deliver a response to the president at all in the first place. And on June 3rd, he finally gets his way. Ordered that Mr. Lyon be excused from attending with the members of this House in presenting the address to the President of the United States in answer to his speech to both houses of Congress. June 9th, Stephen Bullock of Massachusetts arrives. Bullock is another brand new guy. He is a 61-year-old former teacher, military guy, and state representative from Rehoboth. By the way, this is as good a time as any to say I apologize to everyone out there whose city names I mispronounce. The election for this seat went all the way to a third ballot, so he wasn't even elected until April 3rd, 1797. So we'll give him a pass for being late. June 12th, Dempsey Burgess of North Carolina arrives. Burgess is an incumbent who first joined us at the start of the last Congress. June 26th, two more representatives finally join us. Lewis R. Morris of Vermont and Lemuel Benton of South Carolina. Benton is an incumbent who first joined us back at the beginning of the Third Congress. And he's got something of a punctuality problem. He's like the opposite of George Thatcher. He didn't join the Third Congress until June 9th, 1794, 189 days late. He was re-elected to the Fourth Congress and showed up 58 days late. And here he is now, 42 days late. At least he's getting less late every time. As for Morris, he is a brand new guy, and he's here to fill the vacant seat. Vermont finally held their special election back on May 23rd, and Lewis Richard Morris defeated a whole bunch of guys, but mainly perennial losing candidate Stephen Jacob and former Congressman Nathaniel Niles. Morris is a 36-year-old lawyer and state representative from Springfield and a nephew of founding fathers Lewis Morris and Gouverneur Morris. July 3rd, William Smith of South Carolina proposes a resolution to appropriate money to build jails in places, presumably South Carolina, where there aren't currently enough. Quote, "This proposition was opposed on the ground of its being no way connected with the present session and negatived without a division." End quote. In other words, literally everyone said, bro, this doesn't have anything to do with the current session, which is almost over. We are absolutely not taking up a whole new topic today. Later the same day, a whole new topic falls into their laps. As John Allen of Connecticut is about to start a debate about taxes on salt, the House receives an incoming message from the big giant head. President Adams has sent them a whole batch of communications revolving around a certain letter from a certain senator that landed on his desk. This is, of course, the beginning of the William Blount saga. Now, I covered it in the Senate half of this episode, so I won't dwell on it too much here, but I will hit the highlights from the House perspective. So, July 3rd, the House receives the initial communication from President Adams, and the matter is referred to a committee. July 6th, the committee issues their report and proposes a resolution of impeachment. Resolved that William Blount, a senator of the United States from the state of Tennessee, be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. Immediately, debate begins over whether or not the House has the authority to impeach a senator, or, to put it another way, whether or not a senator is subject to impeachment. The Constitution says President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States. Did senators fall under the all civil officers category? Unsurprisingly, various different representatives have various different opinions on how to handle this whole thing. Some say no, it's a criminal issue, not a Congress issue. Some want to postpone the whole thing until the winter session. And still others want to start taking evidence and testimony right now and get to the bottom of it. Unlike the whole brouhaha over the address to the president from earlier, in this case, I can understand why there was such a wide variety of opinion. This was uncharted territory, and everybody involved here knew that whatever they ended up doing was going to set precedents, so they were all treading carefully, and I do understand that. July 7th, Thomas Blount, a North Carolina representative and William's brother, asks for and receives permission to not vote on any questions related to the impeachment, which makes sense. Later, Samuel Sitgreaves of Pennsylvania is sent upstairs to the Senate chamber to officially impeach William Blount and demand that the Senate sequester or suspend Blount from his seat. For their part, at this point in time, the Senate is debating whether or not they should simply expel William Blount. July 8th, a new committee is appointed to prepare the articles of impeachment against William Blount. At the same time, the Senate goes ahead and formally expels him. July 10th, 1797, the last day of the first session. William Blount is no longer a senator, but the House goes ahead with their impeachment plans anyway. Which sounds silly, but it does make sense in a way. Impeachment isn't a clearly defined process at this point. From the House point of view, they don't really know if William Blount can, say, appeal and maybe get his seat back. Or maybe they figure filing the impeachment is a way to back up the Senate's expulsion decision. Whatever the case, they resolve to continue the process during the summer recess. Samuel Dana decides he doesn't want to be on the committee anymore, and so James Bayard is appointed to replace him. And so the first session ends, and there are still 2 empty seats. One of them is Tennessee, which is vacant, as we discussed earlier. The other one is one of the Massachusetts seats, which is not vacant. Its occupant simply never showed up. What can I say? People just don't want to work anymore. Hi, do you like deaths and resignations? Well then, oh boy, do I have a Congress for you. You may recall from the Senate half of this episode that they had 9 resignations and 2 deaths. Well, 8 resignations. Schuyler doesn't count. Point is, it's a lot. And the House is going to have 7 resignations and 4 deaths to add to that. Several of those changes happened during this 1797 recess. First, in July, 4 guys resigned. William Loughton Smith of South Carolina was appointed minister to Portugal. Theophilus Bradbury of Massachusetts was appointed to a seat on the state Supreme Court. Jeremiah Smith of New Hampshire became a district attorney, and Alicia R. Potter of Rhode Island simply retired. On August 3rd, James Davenport of Connecticut died. And finally, in October, George Eag of Pennsylvania resigned to return to his iron mill operations. Conveniently, all the affected states called special elections right away, so all of their new guys will be in or on their way to Philadelphia for the start of the next session. November 13th, 1797, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the first day of the second session of the 5th United States Congress. Remember at the beginning of the first session how we had 82 representatives here on time? That was pretty cool, right? Well, this time we have 41, which is a step back. It's also not a majority, which means I get to say, for the first time in a long time, no quorum! That's a throwback. On the plus side, one of the on-time representatives is George Thatcher of Massachusetts, so he continues his punctuality Iron Man streak. Also in this group, we have 3 brand new guys, and while Congress might not be able to do anything without a quorum, I can still do my job and introduce you to them. So we'll start with Isaac Parker of Massachusetts, because he is the guy who missed the entire first session. Parker is a 28-year-old lawyer from Portland, and this is his first elected office, although he did run for this seat in 1794, achieving what could charitably be called a modest result. He had also gotten some votes back in 1792, but I doubt he was an actual candidate. He was only 23 at the time, and he would have been constitutionally ineligible. The election for this district went to multiple runoffs, so like Stephen Bullock from the first session, Parker wasn't elected until April 3rd, 1797. But Bullock made it to Philadelphia on June 9th. Parker simply skipped the first session entirely. Maybe he thought it would be a shorter session, so he didn't want to travel all the way to Philadelphia just to potentially have to turn around and go home after a week. Who knows? But as a refresher on the rules, since his election was before the first day of the first session, then his term does retroactively start on March 4th. So he is the last of the opening day batch of representatives, and he is officially 182 days late to work. Thomas Tillinghast of Rhode Island was specially elected back in August to replace Alicia R. Potter. Tillinghast is a 55-year-old lawyer and judge from East Greenwich. He was a state representative during the war years, then spent 6 years on the Rhode Island State Supreme Court. After a few years off the radar, Tillinghast returned to the state Supreme Court for another 6 years, from 1791 until his election to this Congress. William Edmund of Connecticut was specially elected back in September to replace the late James Davenport. Edmund is a 42-year-old lawyer from Woodbury. He was a member of the State House of Representatives for 6 years and then was elected to the state Senate earlier this year. Strangely, it seems he never resigned from the state senate to join Congress. All the sources say he was a member of that body from 1797 to 1799. Which would be illegal, but whatever. Who knows? November 23rd, 1797, two more brand new guys arrive. Firstly, William C.C. Claiborne of Tennessee, a 24-year-old state Supreme Court justice. Let me say that again because it bears repeating. 24-year-old state Supreme Court justice. Mind-boggling. Anyway, I covered his life story in this video, and if you haven't seen that one, spoiler alert, yes, he is the youngest congressman ever. But you should still go watch the video. I think it's pretty okay. Anyway, Claiborne was specially elected in September when Tennessee finally got around to holding an election. Most sources will tell you that Andrew Jackson started this Congress, then resigned from the House after being specially elected to the Senate. But that's not true. As I said earlier, Tennessee only held one congressional election back in 1796 after they had just become a state. That was the election that sent Andrew Jackson to the second session of the Fourth Congress. It is possible that he was also elected to this Congress at the same time. That sort of simultaneous election happened all the time back then. But if that's the case, there are no records of it. And, more importantly, it doesn't matter. Even if that is what happened, it doesn't change the fact that Jackson never attended, never got sworn in, and never started his term. Then, in September of this year, Jackson was chosen to replace William Koch in the Senate, and so William Claiborne was specially elected to fill the vacant seat in the House. So what we end up with is the same thing as Philip Schuyler in the Senate half of this episode. Not a resignation, simply a seat that was vacant from March 4th until now. The other new guy is... okay, well, hold on. So for the very few of you out there who have watched the entire Senate half of this video, after I introduce this guy, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be totally honest. Okay? Here we go. The other new guy is Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina, a 47-year-old military guy from Charleston. He is a cousin of Senator Charles Pinckney and a brother of Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. You thought of Nopesworth, didn't you? Didn't you? Anyway, Pinckney was specially elected unopposed back in September to replace original Representative William Loughton Smith. He had just spent 4 years as minister to Great Britain, although for the last couple of those, his position had been usurped by John Jay, a special envoy who ended up leading the negotiations. Meanwhile, Pinckney was sent to Spain despite being nominally still minister to Britain. He was pretty salty about that, of course, but it actually worked out great for him. John Jay ended up negotiating the wildly unpopular treaty with Britain that still bears his name today, and Pinckney negotiated the much more popular Treaty of San Lorenzo, which guaranteed American access to the Mississippi River. November 27th, Bailey Bartlett of Massachusetts arrives. Bartlett is a 47-year-old merchant from Haverhill. He had been specially elected to replace Theophilus Bradbury. Shout out to Thomas over here. Fantastic name. Bartlett had been a member of both houses of the state legislature, but his early life is something of a mystery. But to me, the bigger mystery is how he was born 6 days after his mother died. December 1st, Joseph Heaster of Pennsylvania arrives. Heaster is a 45-year-old merchant from Berne Township. He had been elected back in October after George Eag resigned, and this was the only special election where the seat actually flipped from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. Also, fun fact, the guy who held this seat before George Eag had been Daniel Heaster, Joseph's cousin. You'll recall that Daniel Heaster was the one who had to resign after he moved to Maryland. Joseph had attempted to succeed his cousin right away, but lost both the special and regular 1796 elections to Eag. With Eag finally out of the way, Joseph Heaster was finally elected, possibly just because he was the only guy running. But at any rate, Joseph Heaster's before Congress biography is standard fare. Fought in the war, delegate to state conventions, blah, 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 blah. No, what I want to show you is this line from his Wikipedia page. He was captured and briefly confined in the prison ship Jersey, where he did much to alleviate the sufferings of his fellow prisoners. What does that even mean? He was a merchant, not a physician. The line has no citation, but it was added to the page on December 9th, 2009 with the notation, add info from Appleton's. Appleton's Cyclopedia of American Biography is a massive collection of short biographical sketches from the late 1800s, and it's not super reliable. So I don't know, maybe he really did alleviate the sufferings of his fellow prisoners somehow. Maybe he was a good stand-up comic. December 4th, 1797, Samuel Sitgreaves of Pennsylvania states that the Blunt Impeachment Committee is ready to report their findings. In addition to their official report, they also have a few dozen documents to introduce. They begin reading them into the record, and this goes into the next day. December 15th, Peleg Sprague of New Hampshire arrives. Sprague is a 41-year-old lawyer from the town of Keene. You may remember him from such elections as the one coming into this Congress, where he and Jonathan Freeman missed the 12.5% cutoff, and then Freeman won the subsequent runoff election. Back in July, Jeremiah Smith had resigned, and Sprague ran in the special election to replace him. On the second ballot, Sprague defeated Woodbury Langdon, a former state Supreme Court justice before getting impeached in 1790, and a brother of Senator John Langdon. But more importantly, milestone alert! Peleg Sprague is the 250th representative. So that's cool, pretty exciting. But now it's time to talk about something even more exciting. Remember back at the beginning of the first session when I said that this Congress could be described by the word acrimonious? Now it's time for a fistfight in the House. January 30th, 1798, the House begins balloting to choose their impeachment managers for the William Blount case. Counting the votes is a lengthy process, and during one of these long periods of inactivity, a confrontation occurs between Vermont's Matthew Lyon and Connecticut's Roger Griswold. I covered the whole thing in great detail in this video, but the short version goes like this. Lyon and Griswold exchange words, Griswold makes a derogatory remark about Lyon's military record, and so Lyon spits in his face. Later in the day, Samuel Sewall of Massachusetts proposes a resolution to expel Matthew Lyon. And in true congressional fashion, the matter is referred to a committee. February 13th, after debating the committee's report for several days, the House finally votes 52 to 44 in favor, but expulsion requires a 2/3 majority, so Matthew Lyon gets to keep his seat. For now. February 15th, Griswold versus Lyon Part 2, fracas in the House. Lyon is at his desk writing a letter. Griswold approaches him from behind. Lyon sees him at the last second, but it's too late. Griswold starts beating him about the head and shoulders with a hickory walking stick. The fight spills around to behind the speaker's chair, where Lyon grabs a pair of tongs from the fireplace. They battle their way around the chamber before they are finally separated, and the moment is captured beautifully in this newspaper cartoon from the time. February 16th, Thomas T. Davis of Kentucky proposes a resolution expelling both Griswold and Lyon. Naturally, it's referred to the Committee of Privilege. February 23rd, the committee recommends that neither man should be expelled, just reprimanded. By a 73 to 21 vote, the House agrees. So the whole thing is resolved kinda anticlimactically, and both Lyon and Griswold get to keep their seats. The House settles for simply making them apologize and promise never to fight again. So that saga is over. But it's not the last time that Matthew Lyon will find himself in trouble during this Congress. March 30th, 1798, John Allen of Connecticut proposes the following resolution. Resolved that the President of the United States be requested to communicate to this House the dispatches from the envoys extraordinary of the United States to the French Republic, mentioned in his message of the 19th instant, or such parts thereof as considerations of public safety and interest in his opinion may permit. After a few days of debate, the resolution passes on April 2nd by a 65 to 27 vote. John Allen and John Hanna of Pennsylvania are sent to deliver the request to President Adams. April 3rd, 1798, Adams sends the requested documents, omitting only some names and a few expressions descriptive of the persons. This is, of course, the beginning of the XYZ affair. Way too complicated to dive into in this video, which is already going to be too long as it is, and that's not what this series is for. I just mentioned it here because this Congress has already been one of the most important and chaotic Congresses ever, and now they have to deal with this gigantic diplomatic crisis. April 27th, 1798. Robert Goodloe Harper of South Carolina proposes a resolution that no member of the House be allowed leave of absence for the remainder of the session. Apparently, lots of folks haven't been showing up. May 17th, perhaps annoyed by the extremely long-winded debates on just about any topic in this Congress, Samuel Sitgreaves of Pennsylvania proposes the following resolution. Resolved that during the remainder of the session, the standing rules and orders of the House be amended by adding the following, that no member shall, either in the House or in the Committee of the Whole, speak more than once to the same question. That resolution passes 52-40 the next day. May 31st, just 2 weeks later, Robert Goodloe Harper moves to rescind the new rule. He believed it had been long enough in operation to prove that it was wholly useless, as it was constantly evaded. That motion is carried the next day. June 4th, 1798, Nathaniel Macon of North Carolina announces that his colleague Nathan Bryan has died. And finally, July 16th, 1798, the second session finally ends after a very long 8 months. Just like the last recess, several seats became vacant during the summer of 1798. A few were resignations, but Philadelphia also experienced a yellow fever outbreak, and so there were several deaths. Now, one of them we already saw. Let's see what else happened. On July 31st, John Swanwick of Pennsylvania died. In August, Samuel Sitgreaves of Pennsylvania resigned after being appointed a commissioner to Britain. This is a big one because he was the guy in charge of the ongoing impeachment case against William Blount. On September 5th, Joshua Coit of Connecticut died. And finally, on October 2nd, William B. Giles of Virginia resigned, partially for health reasons, but also because he was really angry about the Alien and Sedition Acts. Oh shit, I haven't even mentioned those yet. This Congress might be one of the most historically significant Congresses of all time. I assume you're all at least somewhat familiar with the Alien and Sedition Acts. In short, the Federalists passed 4 laws that restricted immigration, raised the residency requirement to become a citizen, allowed the president to arrest and deport non-citizens during wartime, and made it illegal to criticize the president. That last one is actually going to come into play in a few minutes. Just like the last recess, all the affected states held their special elections right away, and so by the time the next session starts on December 3rd, we will have all 106 representatives in or on their way to Philadelphia. December 3rd, 1798, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the first day of the 3rd session of the 5th United States Congress. First, the bad news. No quorum! Yes, our attendance is even worse than last time. Only 40 representatives are here. But nevertheless, special shout out to these 19 guys who have been on time to all 3 sessions. You'll notice that one of them is George Thatcher of Massachusetts, so his punctuality Ironman streak continues. So, cheers to them. On the flip side, jeers to these 14 guys who have been late to all 3 sessions. So just like the last session, Congress can't do anything, but I can. And in the group of 40 on-time representatives, we once again have 3 brand new guys. Jonathan Brace of Connecticut is a 44-year-old lawyer and state Supreme Court justice from Harwinton who was elected in October to replace the late Joshua Coit. After graduating from Yale, Brace had first moved to Vermont to practice law before returning to Connecticut in 1786. He served a few terms in the State House of Representatives and most recently was a member of the Council of Assistants. Robert Wan of Pennsylvania is a 33-year-old merchant and former state representative from Philadelphia who was elected in October to replace the late John Swanwick. According to the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress, Wan had been a member of the City Council in Philadelphia and served as president of the Select Council. Whatever that means. Also, like the previous Pennsylvania special election, this one flipped the seat, but this time from the Democratic Republicans back to the Federalists. Joseph Eggleston of Virginia is a 44-year-old state representative who was elected in November to replace William B. Giles. He was originally from Middlesex County, but when he was a youth, his parents built a new home in Amelia County, which eventually became his home. That home, with the whimsical-sounding name Eggleston, still stands today, and it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1980. As for Eggleston himself, he had fought in the war under Light Horse Harry Lee, and he's spent the last several years in the State House of Delegates. December 4th, 1798, 13 more representatives arrive, which is still one short of a quorum, but we do have another brand new guy. Robert Brown of Pennsylvania is a 53-year-old blacksmith from Weaversville who was elected in October to replace Samuel Sitgreaves. And once again, Pennsylvania flips a seat. Man, talk about a swing state. Brown fought in the war and was captured at Fort Washington in 1776. He spent a year on the prison ship Judith. No word on whether or not he did much to alleviate the suffering of his fellow prisoners. December 8th, 1798, President Adams delivers an address to both houses of Congress. Now, I wouldn't normally mention that because every session of every Congress starts with a presidential address, but in this case, Congress has a distinguished guest, George Washington. Adams is basically delivering something like a State of the Union address, which in this case means an update on the quasi-war with France. Washington's there because back during the summer, Adams had appointed him to his old command post. It's largely a pointless ceremonial gesture because no one actually thinks the quasi-war will escalate into a land war, but it was an easy way for Adams to try to win back some of the support he had lost from the Alien and Sedition Acts. And, speaking of the Sedition Act, December 10th, 1798, Peleg Sprague of New Hampshire proposes the usual post-presidential address resolution, that the House should compose and present a respectful address in answer to the president's speech. It is agreed to without an objection. That's right. Without a single objection. Matthew Lyon, where are you? Why didn't Matthew Lyon object this time? Because Matthew Lyon is not here. Why isn't Matthew Lyon here? Because Matthew Lyon is in a jail cell in Vermont. Long story short, Matthew Lyon was, first and foremost, a newspaper publisher, and his current paper was called The Scourge of Aristocracy and Repository of Important Political Truth, in which he was, let's say, outspoken about his opinions on the Federalists generally and President Adams specifically. So he was making plenty of enemies on a regular basis, and after the Sedition Act was passed, it was only a matter of time before Lyon ran afoul of the new law. In June, Lyon had sent a letter to the editor of Spooner's Vermont Journal in which he criticized Adams with the following line: I see every consideration of the public welfare swallowed up in a continual grasp for power, in an unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice. Lyon then spent the rest of the summer campaigning for re-election, and at each stop he became more and more critical of the Adams administration. And sure enough, in October he was arrested and convicted in a trial that was orchestrated against him from the very start. At his quote-unquote trial, where the judge was former Senator and now Supreme Court Justice William Patterson, Lyon was found guilty and sentenced to 4 months in jail and a $1,000 fine. And that's $1,798. Here in 2026, that would probably be like, I don't know, $5 billion. Anyway, so that's why Matthew Lyon isn't here to object to Peleg Sprague's resolution. Also December 10th, 1798, a brand new guy arrives. Richard Dobbs Speight of North Carolina was specially elected back in August to replace the late Nathan Bryan. Speight is the 40-year-old former governor. He was originally from North Carolina, but then grew up in Ireland after both of his parents died by the time he was 8 years old. He returned to North Carolina to fight in the war and afterwards built a lengthy political resume: state legislature, Continental Congress, constitutional conventions, governor, etc., and so forth. However, he does have one very unique distinction. You've probably seen this painting, especially if you watched my video about the streets of Madison. This painting is called Scene at the Signing of the United States Constitution by Howard Chandler Christie. And in this painting, Richard Dobbs Speight is the man actually signing the Constitution. December 13th, with Samuel Sitgreaves gone, the House needs a new impeachment manager for the upcoming William Blount trial, and John Wilkes Katera of Pennsylvania is elected. Over the first 2 weeks of January, the impeachment trial takes place in the Senate. January 14th, 1799, the trial of William Blount ends when the Senate dismisses the charges by a 14-11 vote. Not like it matters, since they expelled him a year and a half ago and Blount had already gone back to his normal life in Tennessee, but, whatever, it's nice to have some closure. February 20th, 1799, Matthew Lyon of Vermont arrives. By the way, while he was serving his 4 months in jail, he was re-elected to the next Congress, so we will see him again in the next episode. But not if Delaware's James A. Bayard has anything to say about it. He immediately proposes a resolution, which I can only assume he's been sitting on for 3 months and now finally has the opportunity to propose. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you what might be the greatest run-on sentence in congressional history. Resolved, that Matthew Lyon, a member of this House, having been convicted of being a notorious and seditious person, and of a depraved mind, and wicked and diabolical disposition, and of wickedly, deceitfully, and maliciously contriving to defame the government of the United States, and of having, with intent and design, to defame the government of the United States and John Adams, the President of the United States, and to bring the said government and President into contempt and disrepute, and with intent and design to excite against the said government and President the hatred of the good people of the United States, and to stir up sedition in the United States, wickedly, knowingly, and maliciously written and published certain scandalous and seditious writings or libels, be therefore expelled from this House. February 22nd, the debate begins. James Bayard and John Allen of Connecticut argue in favor of the expulsion. John Nicholas of Virginia and Albert Gallatin of Pennsylvania argue against it. Gallatin in particular gives a great defense, probably because he has personal experience being screwed over by partisan politics. The debate only takes one day and a mere 14 pages of the record. They vote, and it's 49 to 45 in favor of expulsion. But, as you'll recall from the last session, expulsion requires a 2/3 majority. And so, once again, Matthew Lyon gets to keep his seat. Oh, and by the way, regarding his re-election from jail, it was the second ballot. The first one was back in September, before his arrest and imprisonment, and he won with only 49.7, just short of the required majority. The second one, while he was in jail, he won with 55.5%. So the Federalists' whole plan backfired on them in a big way. March 3rd, 1799, the last day of the 5th Congress. We made it through. It was a long one, but we made it. But I do have one last funny thing to show you. Christopher Champlin of Rhode Island proposes a resolution that the thanks of this House be presented to Jonathan Dayton in testimony of their approbation of his conduct in discharging the arduous and important duties assigned him whilst in the chair. The motion passes, but only by a vote of 40 to 22. Side note, yes, that is only 62 people. It was the last day, and it was a Sunday, so a lot of people just didn't show up. But the point is that it wasn't a unanimous vote. Dayton's response was as follows. Permit me to say that, far from being displeased, I have, on the contrary, been very much gratified at hearing that the resolution of thanks has not been passed as a mere matter of form unanimously. As in all public bodies, there have ever been found men whose approbation must be considered by the meritorious as a censure. So in this body there are, unhappily, some whose censure will be regarded by all whose esteem I value as the highest testimony of merit. Or, to translate it into more modern language, I'm glad you guys didn't make that vote unanimous just as a formality. Like with all public bodies, there are several of you whose approval I don't want, because if you approve of something I did, then it must have been wrong of me to do it. Likewise, if you disapprove of something I did, then that just means I was right to do it. Now that's a mic drop. Okay, so that was a long and exhausting Congress, but we survived. Which is more than you can say for these guys. And that, conveniently, brings me to the part of the show where we update the numbers, starting with deaths and resignations. We had 4 deaths, which brings our House total up to 7, and our Congress total up to 11. As for resignations, we had 7, which brings our House total up to 21, and our Congress overall total up to 46. There were 106 seats in the House, held by a total of 117 representatives. 50 of them were brand new guys, and so we have now met a grand total of 255 representatives and 321 congressmen overall. Time sure flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Anyway, on to the elections! Of the 106 incumbent representatives, 91 of them ran for re-election. Of those, 67 were re-elected. However, 2 of those guys, John Allen of Connecticut and Peleg Sprague of New Hampshire, will end up declining their seats before the next Congress starts. Of course, one of them is a Connecticut rep. That is their tradition, after all. So, we'll have 65 characters returning for the next episode, including 3 of the original representatives, George Thatcher, Thomas Hartley, and Josiah Parker. Will George Thatcher continue his punctuality Iron Man streak? Only time will tell. Of the 24 guys who lost their bids for re-election, I will give a little bit of credit to these 4 guys whose extremely small vote totals imply that they weren't actually running, especially Skinner and Sinnickson. But nevertheless, a loss is a loss, and into that category they go. And so the time has come once again to say goodbye to the people who will be leaving this series. Altogether in this Congress, there are 52 representatives who either already left or will be leaving the House after this Congress. But, as always, not all of them are leaving forever. Abraham Baldwin, James Sherman, and Jonathan Dayton all ran for the Senate and won, so they'll be back right away in the next Senate episode. William Hinman will also be back in the next episode when he gets specially elected to the Senate in 1800. John Millage, Richard Sprigg Jr., Thomas Tillinghast, Thomas Claiborne, John Clopton, Richard Brent, and William B. Giles are all taking a short 2-year break, but they'll all return to the House in 1801 with the 7th Congress. Thompson J. Skinner, James Gillespie, David Bard, William Findley, and Walter Jones are taking 4 years off, but they'll return to the House in 1803 with the 8th Congress. Abraham B. Venable will also be back in 1803, except he'll be coming back as a senator. And lastly, Thomas Blunt will return to the House in 1805, and Elisha R. Potter will return to the House in 1809. And so, for 33 of our beloved characters, it's goodbye forever. But first, a tribute to those we lost along the way. Joshua Coit, James Davenport, John Swanwick, and Nathan Bryan all died during this Congress. Coit and Bryan had no congressional relatives, and Davenport's brother John was elected to Congress right away and will be in the next episode. But the spotlight here goes to John Swanwick, who, in his final year, published a book of poetry. It can be read for free online, and it's, I don't know, fine? I don't do poetry. First up, the quitters. These are the guys who resigned during this Congress. Theophilus Bradbury continued on the Massachusetts Supreme Court, but in February of 1802 he was paralyzed, probably as a result of a stroke. He was eventually removed from office in July of 1803. Not sure why it took almost a year and a half, but whatever. And he died a couple months later. Fun fact, his house in Newburyport still stands, and it's currently a dentist's office. Jeremiah Smith continued as a U.S. District Attorney until 1800. Then he was a Rockingham County probate court judge for a year. After the passage of the Judiciary Act of 1801, President John Adams appointed Smith to a new federal circuit court seat. Smith was one of Adams's midnight judges. A year later, the Judiciary Act of 1802 eliminated Smith's court and thus his job. He was fine though, don't worry. He became Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court for 7 years, then he was Governor of New Hampshire for a year, and then he went back to being Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court for another 3 years before retiring in 1820. He eventually died in 1842. His brother Samuel Smith became a one-term representative from New Hampshire, and his nephew Robert Smith, not that one, that's the one, became a representative from Illinois. Samuel Sitgreaves resigned after being named a U.S. Commissioner to Britain. He retired to Easton, Pennsylvania in 1802 and became a burgess. I didn't know that title was still a thing after 1800. At any rate, he was a big deal in Easton. He helped found the library, the bank, and the Episcopal Church. He died in 1827. George Eag resigned to return to his extensive iron operations in Berks County. I just imagine him sitting in Congress, staring out the window, debates happening behind him in the background, and all he can do is think about his beloved ironworks. Anyway, he died in 1829. William Loughton Smith resigned after President Adams appointed him minister to Portugal, and he did that until he was recalled by President Jefferson in 1801. According to our good friends at the Biographical Directory, he ran unsuccessfully for Congress again in 1804, 1806, and 1808, but then won election to the State House of Representatives in 1808. However, most of that is wrong. According to the New Nation Votes database, the only one of those elections that Smith ran in was 1806, which he did in fact lose. Even the State House of Representatives thing is wrong. He is in the results for State Senate, but he didn't win. And it was not close. Anyway, he died in 1812. Peleg Sprague and John Allen both won their elections, but later declined their seats. In both cases, most of the major sources say they didn't run, but I'm looking at the election results and there they are. In Allen's case, he was even the top vote getter, so I don't know what these people are talking about. But whatever the case may be, both guys said no and were replaced before the next Congress started. Sprague retired to Keene, New Hampshire and died a couple years later. Allen went back to his law practice in Lichfield, and in 1800 he was appointed to the state Supreme Court. He did that for 6 years, then went back to lawyering, and ultimately died in 1812. His son, also called John Allen, became a representative from Ohio, and his daughter Ursula married a man called Sherlock Andrews, who also became a representative from Ohio. In a neat little coincidence, Andrews ended up succeeding his brother-in-law in Congress. And now, the Losers Club, the guys who ran for re-election and lost. Nathaniel Smith wasn't really running, but he did get 106 votes, so technically he lost. He returned to state-level politics, serving on the Council of Assistants and in the state Senate. In 1806, he was appointed to the state Supreme Court, replacing John Allen, coincidentally, and he did that until 1819. He also attended the Hartford Convention of 1814 and 15. He died in 1822. His brother Nathan Smith became a senator from Connecticut, and his nephew Truman Smith became a representative and senator from Connecticut. Stephen Bullock won the general election on November 5th, 1798, and then again on January 17th, 1799, and then again on April 1st, 1799. That damn majority requirement strikes again. Finally, on June 6th, 1799, a majority was reached by the other guy. Bullock tried again in 1800, but lost that one too. So he stayed local, serving a few years on the governor's council and as a county court judge. He died in 1816. Mark Thompson and Thomas Sinnickson both lost, although Sinnickson only got 2 votes, so you know the drill. He probably wasn't running, but still technically a loss. Thompson, though, was running, and it wasn't even close. Sinnickson retired to private life and died in 1817. His nephew Thomas Sinnickson became a representative from New Jersey. As for Thompson, he retired to his home in Marksboro, which was allegedly named after him long before he ever joined Congress, at least according to a book from 1910. At any rate, he died in 1803. David Brooks and John Williams both lost, and then lost again in 1800. Williams lost a third time in 1802 before giving up, but Brooks waited a while and then actually won in 1812. Except that election ended up not counting. What had happened was, this was one of those years where seats would be reapportioned based on census results. For reasons that I still don't understand, some New York districts held elections in April, before the reapportioning. That's where Brooks won, essentially unopposed. But then New York got 10 additional seats, and after the redistricting, all new elections were held, and Brooks must not have liked the odds in his new district, so he didn't run at all. He served a few non-consecutive terms as clerk of Dutchess County and then retired. He died in 1838. As for Williams, he retired after the 1802 loss, and he died in 1806. Matthew Locke and Dempsey Burgess both lost badly. Locke tried again in 1800 and lost, but he did get 1 legislative vote in the Senate election that year. Burgess retired right away. Both men died soon after, Burgess in 1800 and Locke in 1801. Locke's nephew, Francis Locke Jr., would be elected to the Senate in 1814 but declined to serve, and his great-great-great-granddaughter was Arkansas Representative Ephigene? And his great-great-great-granddaughter was Arkansas Representative Ephigene Locke Wingo. Quick fun fact, as of 2026, 49 of our 50 states have elected at least 1 woman to the House of Representatives. Would you like to guess the one state that hasn't? That's right, Mississippi. Lemuel Benton and William Smith both lost, in Smith's case by just 18 votes. Both men ran for the seats again in 1800 and both lost. Smith quit after that, but Benton tried again in 1803 and lost by just 17 votes. He retired to his plantation in Darlington and died in 1818. His great-grandson was Congressman George W. Dargan. As for Smith, he returned to South Carolina but stayed active in politics. He served 8 years in the state Senate and then retired in 1818. He died in 1837. And the last of the Losers Club, John Chapman. He retired to Upper Makefield Township and died just over a year later. And finally, the guys who left Congress and never looked back. William Matthews retired to private life in Cecil County. He died in 1808. He disappeared so thoroughly that we don't even know the actual date of his death. Nathaniel Freeman Jr. retired to his home in Sandwich and died unexpectedly at the age of just 34 in 1800. Isaac Parker chose to return to state-level politics. President Adams appointed him a U.S. Marshal for Massachusetts' Maine district right away in 1799. Later, in 1801, President Jefferson spent much of his first year in office undoing anything and everything Adams related that he could, and that included Isaac Parker's job as U.S. Marshal. But it turned out okay for Parker. In 1806, Governor and former Senator Caleb Strong appointed Parker to the state Supreme Court. In 1814, Parker became Chief Justice, and he stayed in that job until he died in 1830. Hezekiah Lord Hosmer retired to his home in Hudson. That was some good alliteration. He served a few terms as town recorder and died in 1814. John E. Van Allen returned to New York, served 2 terms in the state assembly, and then retired to DeFreetzville, a hamlet of North Greenbush, where he died in 1807. James Cochrane retired to private life in New York. He was pulled out of retirement in 1814 to serve a few terms in the state senate, and then he retired again. In his later years, he was postmaster of the town of Oswego. He died in 1848. His nephew, John Cochrane, who added an E to the family name for some reason, became a congressman from New York. Joseph McDowell retired to North Carolina and died in 1801. His son, also called Joseph McDowell because why not have 3, became a congressman from Ohio. Blair McClenachan went through a rough stretch. During the Revolution, McClenachan had been right up there with fellow Pennsylvanian Robert Morris as one of the richest guys in the country, and like Morris, McClenachan had helped finance the war. After leaving Congress, McClenachan copied Morris again after his business interests failed, and he ended up in debtor's prison. In May 1801, he wrote to President Jefferson asking for a job, any job. Jefferson ignored him. So in January 1802, he tried again, even mentioning a specific job that was about to become available. Jefferson ignored him again. McClenachan eventually died in 1812. Daniel Morgan retired to Virginia and died in 1802. There is a statue of him in downtown Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Morgan County, West Virginia is named after him. James Macker returned to his home in Bedford County but stayed politically active. He later served a few more terms in the State House of Delegates, and he died in 1827. And finally, Carter Bassett Harrison retired to Prince George County and died in 1808. His brother William became a territorial delegate, a representative, a senator, and of course, President of the United States. Briefly. And that finally brings us to the end of the 5th Congress and the end of this episode. This was a long one, and I apologize. I don't actually apologize. You should probably start expecting long videos in this series. If you made it through this entire episode to this point, thank you so much. You are a hero. Anyway, you know the drill. You know how these endings go. Follow me on Blue Sky. Check out my new Patreon. Like and subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for watching. I am the Congressman, and I will see you next time.